A little girl handed a note to a millionaire CEO who was having dinner, and what he read left him in shock. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The elegant Pinnacle restaurant buzzed with the quiet energy of power and wealth. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over white tablecloths as waiters glided between tables, carrying silver trays and expensive wines. In the corner booth, partially secluded for privacy, sat James Sullivan, the 38-year-old CEO of Sullivan Enterprises, with his tailored navy suit, confident posture, and piercing blue eyes. James commanded attention without trying. The three investors across from him were hanging on his every word as he outlined the final details of a $200 million deal that would cement his company's dominance in the tech sector. "Gentlemen, once you sign these papers, we'll be making history together," James said, his deep voice carrying just the right note of authority. His assistant Meredith nodded approvingly from the edge of the table as she prepared the contracts. Just as James reached for his fountain pen, he noticed a small commotion at the restaurant entrance. Three little girls, identical in every way, had somehow slipped past the maitre d'. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with matching blue dresses and blonde hair pulled back in simple ponytails. Their eyes, wide and uncertain, scanned the restaurant until they found him. The smallest one, or perhaps just the most timid, broke away from her sisters and approached his table. The restaurant seemed to quiet as the child, clutching a folded napkin, stopped beside his chair. "Are you Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James glanced at his confused business associates before turning to the little girl. "Yes, I am. What can I do for you, sweetheart?" The child thrust the napkin toward him and then quickly retreated to her sisters. James unfolded it, expecting a child's drawing or perhaps an autograph request. He'd been featured in Forbes last month after all. Instead, in careful handwriting that clearly belonged to a child trying their very best, were words that stopped his heart. "Our grandmother Margaret is dying. She says you're our father. We're at Pine Hills Shelter." James felt the blood drain from his face. Margaret. He hadn't heard that name in nearly 7 years, but he remembered her daughter Catherine, his college sweetheart, the woman he'd loved passionately before his career took him in another direction. They'd parted ways when he chose his company over their relationship. "Mr. Sullivan?" One of the investors leaned forward, concerned. "Is everything all right?" James stared at the three identical little girls who now huddled together near the entrance. 6 years old. The same slightly upturned nose as Catherine. And as one of them turned slightly, he caught sight of something that made his chest tighten. A small crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist, identical to his own. I need to go," James said, standing abruptly and gathering his things. "Meredith, reschedule everything." "Sir, we've been working on this deal for months. The papers are ready to sign right now," Meredith protested, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "These investors flew in from Tokyo specifically for this dinner," she added in a hushed, urgent tone. James barely heard her. His focus remained on the three little girls, his daughters, who were now being approached by the restaurant manager. "I apologize, gentlemen. A family emergency has come up," he said, straightening his tie automatically. "Meredith will take care of everything and arrange another meeting as soon as possible." Without waiting for their response, James crossed the restaurant floor in long, determined strides. As he approached the children, they looked up at him with identical blue eyes. His eyes, filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Mr. Sullivan," the manager began, "I apologize for the interruption. These children shouldn't be in here without—" "It's fine," James interrupted. "They're with me." He knelt down to eye level with the girls, his mind racing with questions. "I'm James Sullivan. Who are you?" The one in the middle, standing slightly ahead of her sisters with a protective stance, answered, "I'm Emma. These are my sisters, Olivia and Sophia," she said. pointing to each in turn. Our grandmother Margaret said we needed to find you before it's too late. James's heart hammered in his chest as he looked at the three identical faces. Faces that somehow reflected his own. With absolute clarity, he knew his life had just changed forever. "Where is your grandmother now?" he asked gently. "At the hospital," the one named Olivia replied. "We're staying at Pine Hills Shelter. Victoria, that's our mom's sister. She brought us there when Grandma got too sick." James stood, decision made. The multi-million-dollar deal would have to wait. Nothing was more important than finding out the truth. "Come with me," he said softly, offering his hand. "Let's go see your grandmother." The sleek black Tesla glided through the evening traffic as James navigated toward Pine Hills Shelter, his mind racing faster than the car. Those three identical faces, Emma, Olivia, and Sophia, sat quietly in the back seat, their small, hands clutching worn backpacks. "Is it much further?" Emma asked, the self-appointed spokesperson of the trio. "Just a few more minutes," James replied, catching their eyes in the rearview mirror. "Have you been at the shelter long?" 3 weeks and 4 days, Olivia answered precisely, since Grandma Margaret had to go to the hospital. The shelter was nestled between a laundromat and a discount grocery store, a simple 2-story building with peeling blue paint. As they walked toward the entrance, James felt the weight of curious stares from staff and residents alike. A tall woman with a clipboard approached them immediately. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Director Patel. We received your call." Her eyes darted between him and the girls. "I must say this is highly unusual." In her cramped office, Director Patel explained the situation while the girls waited outside. "Catherine Williams passed away 3 months ago. Car accident. Margaret's been caring for the triplets since then, but her cancer progressed rapidly. When she became too ill, Victoria, Catherine's sister, brought the girls here rather than taking them herself. Why didn't anyone contact me before now?" James asked, his voice strained. "According to our records, you weren't listed as the father. The birth certificates say father unknown." She slid the documents across her desk. "But the resemblance is striking." James stared at the certificates. Emma Rose Williams, Olivia Grace Williams, Sophia Faith Williams. All born on October 12th, 6 years ago, approximately 9 months after he'd last seen Catherine. "I'd like to see Margaret," he said firmly. At St. Luke's Hospital, the antiseptic smell hit him as they walked down the sterile corridor. Margaret's room was at the end of the hall, a private room James suspected she couldn't afford. The woman lying in the bed barely resembled the vibrant Margaret he remembered from college days, when she'd welcomed him into their family home for holiday dinners. Her once auburn hair had thinned, her skin now papery and pale. "James Sullivan," she whispered, a weak smile forming. "You came." "Why didn't Catherine tell me?" he asked, emotion threatening to overtake him. "She tried," Margaret replied. "When she found out she was pregnant, you'd just secured your first major investor. She called your office for weeks, but your assistant said you were unavailable." James felt the floor shift beneath him. He remembered that period. 80-hour work weeks, sleeping at the office, his phone perpetually on, do not disturb. By the time she realized she was carrying triplets, her pride wouldn't let her try again. Margaret continued. "She thought you'd moved on." The door swung open and a younger woman entered, slim, with Catherine's high cheekbones but harder eyes. "Victoria," Margaret acknowledged. Victoria's gaze cut to James like ice. So the almighty CEO finally decided to acknowledge his responsibilities? Her voice dripped with disdain. 7 years too late, James." Before he could respond, tiny fingers slipped into his hand. Sophia, the quietest of the three, stood beside him, her blue eyes, his eyes, looking up with innocent trust that shattered his heart and rebuilt it in the same moment. In that hospital room, with his daughters beside him and their resentful aunt across from him, James Sullivan made the first spontaneous decision of his meticulously planned life. "I'm taking them home with me," he declared. "Tonight." Victoria's face hardened as she stepped closer to James, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You can't just waltz in here after 7 years and take them. There are procedures, background checks." Director Patel, who had accompanied them to the hospital, cleared her throat awkwardly. "Mr. Sullivan, while I understand your enthusiasm, Victoria is correct. Temporary custody requires proper documentation and court approval." James released Sophia's small hand and straightened to his full height, the business titan emerging beneath the shocked father. "Call my lawyer," he instructed Meredith, who had been hovering in the doorway. "Tell him I need emergency temporary guardianship papers drawn up immediately." "You're insane," Victoria hissed. "You think you can buy your way into their lives? These girls don't even know you." "They don't know you very well either," Margaret interjected weakly from her bed. "You visited them 3 times in 6 years, Victoria. Don't pretend this is about their well-being." The triplets huddled together, near the hospital window, their identical faces solemn as they watched the adults argue over their future. Emma's protective arm wrapped around Sophia's shoulders, while Olivia nervously twisted the hem of her dress. "They belong with family," Victoria insisted. "I am family," James replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'm their father." 2 hours later, James's persistence and considerable resources had accomplished what normally took weeks. His lawyer arrived with emergency custody papers signed by a judge who owed James a favor. Margaret, as their legal guardian, signed her temporary consent from her hospital bed. "I know Catherine would approve," she whispered to James, her hand trembling as she set down the pen. "She never stopped loving you despite everything." Victoria stormed out, but not before issuing a final threat. "This isn't over, Sullivan, not by a long shot." As James led the girls toward the hospital exit, his phone buzzed incessantly with messages from board members and investors demanding explanations for his abrupt departure. He silenced it without a second glance. "Where are we going now?" Emma asked, her small voice hesitant yet brave. "Home," James replied, surprising himself with how right the word felt. "My home, which I suppose is now your home too. Do you have toys there?" Olivia inquired pragmatically. "No," James admitted, "but we can get some tomorrow." "Mommy's picture," Sophia suddenly spoke, tugging at his sleeve. "We need Mommy's picture from the shelter." James knelt down to her level, struck by the quiet intensity in her eyes, so like Catherine's. "We'll get it, I promise. Everything that's important to you." As they walked through the parking garage toward his car, the reality of his impulsive decision began to settle in. 3 young lives now depended on him. A man who scheduled bathroom breaks and had his meals delivered to ensure maximum productivity. "Mr. Sullivan," Meredith approached cautiously, tablet in hand. "The Tokyo investors are threatening to pull out, and the board wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning." James looked down at the 3 identical faces watching him expectantly, then back at his assistant. "Cancel the meeting, and tell Tokyo if they want this deal they'll wait." For the first time in his adult life, James Sullivan had found something more important than Sullivan Enterprises. James's penthouse apartment occupied the entire 52nd floor of the Sullivan Tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights below. As the elevator doors opened directly into his foyer, the triplets gasped in unison. "You live in the sky," Olivia exclaimed, rushing to press her small hands against the glass. "Don't touch," Emma warned automatically, then glanced uncertainly at James. "Are we allowed to touch the windows?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course, this is your home now too." James surveyed his apartment through their eyes. Minimalist furniture in shades of grey and black, sleek technology hidden within custom cabinetry, abstract art worth more than most houses. Nothing child-friendly or welcoming. "Where will we sleep?" Sophia asked quietly, clutching a worn backpack to her chest, the only possessions they'd been allowed to grab from the shelter before his lawyer shuffled them out. "I have guest rooms," James replied, leading them down a hallway. 3 of them, actually. Each identical room contained a queen-sized bed, a nightstand, and nothing else. The girls stood shoulder to shoulder in the doorway of the first room, exchanging glances in that silent communication only multiples seemed to share. "Can we stay together tonight?" Emma asked, her brave facade cracking slightly. "We always sleep together." James nodded, suddenly feeling hopelessly inadequate. "Of course. Let me find some smaller clothes for you to sleep in." After an awkward search through his drawers, the best he could offer was 3 identical white t-shirts that hung to their ankles like nightgowns. As he tucked them into one large bed, the strangeness of the situation struck him fully. Yesterday he'd been a bachelor, CEO with a meticulously organized life. Today he was responsible for 3 small humans who were genetically half him, but completely unfamiliar. "Mr. Sullivan?" Olivia called as he reached for the light switch. "Do you have children's toothpaste? The mint kind burns our tongues." "No, but we'll get some tomorrow," he promised. "And nightlights," Sophia whispered, "for the monsters." James cleared his throat. "There aren't any monsters here, I promise." "That's what grown-ups always say," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "But they don't see what we see in the dark." After improvising 3 small lights from his phone, a tablet, and a desk lamp left on in the bathroom, James retreated to his bedroom. He sank onto the edge of his bed, loosening his tie as reality crashed over him. He was a father to triplets, Catherine's daughters, his daughters. His phone rang, the Tokyo investors again. As he silenced it, another call came through. "Victoria." "This isn't over," she stated without preamble. "You abandoned my sister when she was pregnant. You don't get to play hero now just because it's convenient." "I didn't know she was pregnant," James replied, keeping his voice low. "Catherine never told me." "She tried," Victoria spat. "But the great James Sullivan was too busy building his empire to take her calls." After Victoria hung up, James sat in the darkness, haunted by what might have been if he'd been less focused on success and more available to the woman he'd once loved. A soft whimper from the guest room pulled him from his thoughts. He found Sophia sitting up in bed, tears streaming down her face while her sisters slept. "Bad dream?" he asked awkwardly. She nodded, hiccuping softly. "I saw Mommy again. She was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her." James hesitated, then sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Your mom was an amazing woman." "Did you love her?" Sophia asked directly, in that unfiltered way of children. The question pierced his carefully constructed armor. "Yes," he admitted. "Very much." In the soft glow of the makeshift nightlights, James Sullivan faced the first of many uncomfortable truths this new life would bring. The first ray of morning sunlight streamed through the vast windows, casting long shadows across James's bedroom floor. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. 27 missed calls, 42 unread emails, and a calendar full of appointments that now seemed trivial compared to the 3 little girls sleeping down the hall. A soft sound from the kitchen startled him. Following the noise, he found Emma perched precariously on his marble counter, small arms stretched toward a cabinet. "What are you doing?" James asked, rushing forward to catch her before she fell. "Looking for breakfast," Emma answered matter-of-factly as he set her down. "We always get our own breakfast. Grandma Margaret couldn't stand up well in the mornings." The simple statement hit James like a physical blow. These girls, his daughters, had been taking care of themselves and apparently their grandmother, too. "What do you usually eat?" he asked, opening his refrigerator to reveal nothing but protein shakes, champagne, and takeout containers. Cereal with milk, Olivia answered, shuffling into the kitchen in her oversized t-shirt, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Or toast with peanut butter if there's no milk. A quick inventory of his bachelor kitchen revealed nothing remotely suitable for children. I'll order something, James decided, reaching for his phone. Order? Like at a restaurant? Emma's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Yes, I have food delivered most mornings. The girls exchanged glances that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Is that because you don't know how to cook? Olivia asked with disarming directness. Before James could answer, his phone rang, the familiar tone he'd specifically set for board members. He felt the immediate pull of obligation, the instinct to answer instantly. But the 3 pairs of expectant eyes watching him caused him to hesitate. I should take this, he said, stepping away from the kitchen. It's important. More important than breakfast, Emma challenged, crossing her arms in a gesture so reminiscent of Catherine that James almost gasped. With a decisive swipe, he silenced the call. No, nothing is more important than breakfast now. While they ate delivered pancakes and fruit from the city's best breakfast spot, James received a text from Meredith. Emergency board meeting called. Your presence required in 30 minutes. Tokyo investors threatening to walk. The old James would have been out the door already. The new James, whatever that meant, looked at the syrup-covered faces across from him and replied, attending remotely. Set up video conference. An hour later, James found himself in an impossible situation, trying to salvage a multi-million-dollar deal via video conference while 3 6-year-olds explored his apartment with increasing volume. The Tokyo investors frowned visibly when Sophia wandered into frame, asking loudly if she could watch cartoons. Mr. Sullivan, the lead investor said coldly, perhaps we should reschedule when you're less distracted. No need, James replied, firmly. My daughters will be joining our household permanently, so we might as well adapt now. The terms of our deal remain advantageous for both parties. The word daughters felt strange on his tongue, terrifying yet somehow right. After the call ended, with the deal intact but barely, James found the girls in his home office examining the only personal photograph he kept. A faded picture of him and Catherine from their college days, laughing by a fountain. That's Mommy, Sophia said quietly, touching the glass frame. She looks happy. She was, James confirmed, sitting down beside them. Your mother was the happiest person I ever knew. She could find joy in anything, even rainy days and failed exams. Did she love you? Olivia asked, ever the straightforward one. James hesitated, suddenly wary of intruding on Catherine's narrative. Had she told the girls about him? What had she said? We loved each other very much, he answered carefully, but sometimes adults make choices that take them in different directions. You chose your job instead of her, Emma stated bluntly. That's what Aunt Victoria says. The accusation stung with its simple truth. I made choices I regret, James admitted. If I had known about you 3, I would have made different ones. That night, after a day of awkward attempts at parenting and fielding calls from his bewildered staff, James was awakened by heart-wrenching sobs. He found Sophia curled into a tight ball in the hallway, gasping between tears. I want Mommy, she cried as he knelt beside her. I had the dream again. She was trying to tell me something. Unsure what to do, James tentatively reached out, and to his surprise, the little girl launched herself into his arms. Her small body shook with grief as he held her awkwardly at first, then more securely. I miss her too, he whispered. Surprised by the truth of his words, he hadn't allowed himself to think about Catherine in years, burying those feelings under work and ambition. You do? Sophia hiccuped, looking up at him with wet eyes. "Every day," James admitted. "Even when I pretended not to." He carried her back to the bedroom where her sisters slept, but instead of putting her down, he sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photo, Catherine at graduation, her smile radiant. "I've kept this with me for 7 years," he confessed softly. "Your mother was extraordinary." Emma and Olivia had awakened now, watching this exchange with solemn eyes. "Do you really want us?" Emma asked suddenly, her voice small despite her brave face. "Or are we just another problem for you to solve?" The question stripped away all pretense. In that moment, James Sullivan, master negotiator, strategic genius, corporate titan, had no calculated response, only raw truth. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted, "but I want to learn. Because you three are the most important people in my world now, even if I just discovered that world existed." As the four of them sat in the dim light, a tentative bridge formed across the chasm of years and secrets, fragile, uncertain, but real. The sterile hospital corridor seemed endless as James walked toward Margaret's room. 2 days had passed since he'd brought the triplets home, days filled with frantic shopping for children's essentials and impromptu lessons in parenting from YouTube videos watched in secret when the girls were occupied. He paused outside Margaret's door, preparing himself. The girls had stayed home with Meredith, who had surprised him by revealing she'd once been a kindergarten teacher before switching to corporate life. "James." Margaret's voice was weaker than before, her skin more translucent against the white sheets. "I wasn't sure you'd come back." "I had to," he replied, taking the chair beside her bed. "There's so much I don't know." Margaret's smile was gentle but tinged with sadness. "What do you want to know first?" Why didn't she tell me? The question that had haunted him since the moment he unfolded that napkin at the restaurant. Margaret's thin fingers plucked at her blanket. "She tried, James, for weeks after she found out. But you were launching Sullivan Enterprises. Your assistant kept saying you were unavailable." James closed his eyes, remembering that time. He'd instructed Meredith, not his current assistant but her predecessor, to screen all personal calls. Catherine's would have been blocked without him ever knowing. "When she learned it was triplets," Margaret continued, "she was terrified but determined. Catherine said you'd made your choice already, your career over her. She was too proud to beg after being rejected so many times." "I never rejected her," James protested. "We agreed to take different paths." "Is that what you told yourself?" Margaret's voice sharpened briefly. "She loved you enough to let you go chase your dreams, and you loved your ambitions enough to let her go." The truth of it struck him like a physical blow. "She built a good life for the girls," Margaret said more gently. "Used her art degree to sell paintings. We helped when we could. She never took a dime of government assistance. Too proud for that, too." "Why now?" James asked. "Why tell me after all these years?" "Because she planned to," Margaret revealed, her eyes filling with tears. Before the accident, Catherine had decided it was time. The girls were asking questions about their father. She said you deserved to know your daughters, and they deserved to know you. The door opened behind him, and Victoria stepped in, stopping abruptly when she saw James, still here, playing the concerned father. Her voice dripped with disdain. "How long before you get bored of this newest acquisition?" "Victoria," Margaret warned weakly. "No, Mother. He needs to hear this." Victoria stepped closer. "Catherine, watched your rise to fame from afar, James. Saw your picture in business magazines while she worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. She could have demanded child support, could have taken you to court and gotten millions. But she wanted the girls to be loved for themselves, not their connection to your fortune. James stood, feeling his temper rise. I would have been there, if I'd known. Would you? Victoria challenged. The great James Sullivan, changing diapers and attending preschool plays instead of board meetings? I doubt it. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Another crisis at the office. But for the first time in his career, James Sullivan let it ring unanswered. I'm not going anywhere, Victoria, he said firmly. Those girls are my daughters, and I intend to be the father they deserve, even if I'm 7 years late. As he left the hospital, James realized the shadows of his past choices would continue to haunt his present. But with each step, his resolve strengthened. The triplets weren't just an obligation, they were his chance at redemption. The headline splashed across James's tablet screen the next morning. Billionaire's secret triplets, Sullivan Enterprises, CEO claims long-lost daughters. Below it was a grainy photo of him escorting the girls into his building, their small faces partially visible despite his attempts to shield them. How did they find out so quickly? James muttered, scrolling through the article that detailed his dramatic exit from the Pinnacle restaurant and subsequent custody filing. I may have had something to do with that. Victoria's voice came from his doorway, where she stood with a newspaper in hand. Don't look so surprised, James. Your doorman let me up when I mentioned I was the girl's aunt. You leaked this to the press? James's voice remained measured, aware of little ears that might be listening. Victoria's smile was cold. I simply gave an exclusive interview about how the mighty James Sullivan abandoned my pregnant sister, then swooped in years later to claim his heirs once the hard work of raising them was done. James set his tablet down carefully. The girls don't need this public spectacle. The girls need to be with family who actually cared about them before they became convenient PR props. Victoria countered. I've filed for custody. My lawyer thinks I have an excellent case as their maternal aunt who has been in their lives since birth. Before James could respond, Emma appeared in the hallway, her face uncharacteristically pale. There are people with cameras outside our school. They kept asking if we're really your daughters. James felt a surge of protective anger. You went to school. Who took you? Your assistant, Emma replied. But Aunt Victoria came to pick us up when the photographers showed up. She said it wasn't safe. James turned back to Victoria, who smiled triumphantly. You see, while you were in meetings all morning, I was protecting the girls from the media. Circus you created. You created this situation, James said quietly, careful to keep his tone even in front of Emma. Meeting with my lawyers now seems prudent, doesn't it? Victoria taunted. I'll see myself out. The girls have my number if they need me, which they will once you realize 3 children don't fit into your carefully controlled life. After she left, James found all 3 girls huddled in the media room, the television tuned to a news channel where a reporter stood outside Sullivan Tower. Sources close to the family claim Sullivan had no contact with the children until last week, raising questions about his sudden interest in fatherhood. James turned it off immediately. I'm sorry you had to see that. Is it true? Olivia asked, her analytical mind always seeking facts. Did you not want us before? James sat down, facing the most difficult conversation of his life. I didn't know about you, he said simply. If I had, I would have been there from the beginning. Aunt Victoria says you broke Mommy's heart, Sophia whispered. That's why she never told you about us. The pain in her voice cut through him. Your mother and I loved each other very much, James said carefully, but I made choices that put my work first. That was my mistake, not hers. Emma, ever the protector, stood slightly in front of her sisters. Are you going to make the same mistake with us? The question hung in the air, challenging and perfect in its simplicity. Outside, reporters gathered. His phone buzzed incessantly, with calls from the board. Victoria's custody threat loomed. But in that moment, looking at three faces that mirrored his own, James Sullivan's priorities finally, irrevocably shifted. "No," he promised. "You three come first now. Everything else can wait." Whether any of them truly believed him remained to be seen. Emma Sullivan sat on the windowsill of their new bedroom, watching reporters mill about on the sidewalk 52 floors below. They looked like tiny ants from this height, but their presence felt suffocating nonetheless. Her sisters were arranging their meager possessions, 3 stuffed animals, a handful of books, and the framed photo of their mother that Mr. Sullivan, their father, had insisted on placing prominently on their dresser. Emma didn't fully trust this arrangement yet. Adults made promises all the time, only to break them when something more important came along. She'd learned that lesson when her mother died and Grandma Margaret got sick and Aunt Victoria dropped them at the shelter. Her job was to protect her sisters, not to believe in fairy tales about billionaire fathers. "Do you think he'll let us paint the walls?" Olivia asked, ever practical as she measured the room with careful steps. "Our room at Grandma's was yellow. Mom said yellow helps you think better." "Maybe," Emma replied non-committally. "Don't get too attached, though. Remember what happened at the shelter? We thought we'd stay there until Grandma got better, but then we came here." Across the room, Sophia sat cross-legged on the carpet, silently drawing in the sketchbook their father had bought yesterday. Of the 3, Sophia was most like their mother, artistic, dreamy, and deeply sensitive. She hadn't spoken much since the reporters ambushed them at school. "What are you drawing, Soph?" Emma asked, leaving her post to check on her quietest sister. Sophia tilted the sketchbook to reveal a surprisingly detailed drawing of their father, his face etched with lines of worry. "He looks sad when he thinks we're not watching," she said, softly. Olivia joined them, examining the drawing with her analytical eye. "Mom used to draw people's feelings too," she noted. "Remember how she could tell what we were thinking just by looking at our faces?" "He doesn't know how to do that yet," Emma pointed out. "He doesn't know us at all." "We don't know him either," Sophia countered with unexpected firmness. "But Mom must have loved him once. Look." She flipped to another page in her sketchbook, where she'd recreated the photo of their parents from memory, young, laughing, in love. "Aunt Victoria says he broke Mom's heart," Emma reminded them. "Aunt Victoria says lots of things," Olivia replied skeptically. "Remember when she promised to take us to Disney World if we got all A's? That never happened." A knock at their door interrupted their conversation. Their father stood uncertainly in the doorway, looking exactly as Sophia had drawn him, powerful, yet somehow vulnerable. "I was thinking we might get out of the apartment today," he said. "There's a private entrance through the garage. We could visit a toy store, maybe get some things to make this room feel more like yours." The sisters exchanged glances, their triplet telepathy in full effect. Emma, designated spokesperson by unspoken agreement, nodded cautiously. "That sounds okay," she said, testing the waters of this new relationship. "But we don't need fancy toys. Just some books, maybe, and art supplies for Sophia." James Sullivan, their father, smiled, and for a brief moment, Emma saw what her mother might have loved about him. "Books and art supplies it is," he agreed. "And maybe ice cream after." As they prepared to venture out together for the first time as a family, each sister harbored different thoughts. Olivia mentally calculated how long this arrangement might last, mapping contingency plans. Sophia observed their father's movements, capturing his essence in her mind to draw later. And Emma maintained her protective vigilance, unwilling to surrender her guard just yet. None of them fully understood that their presence had already changed James Sullivan in fundamental ways, or that the battle for their future was just beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of James's penthouse as he reviewed the custody filing papers his legal team had prepared. After a week of navigating his new role as father to the triplets, another storm was brewing. His phone buzzed, with an incoming call from his lead attorney. "Good morning, Richard," James answered, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the girls. "Not so good, I'm afraid," Richard replied tensely. "Victoria Williams has officially filed for full custody. And James, it's not pretty. She's hired Elaine Hoffman." James felt his stomach drop. Elaine Hoffman was notorious in family court, a ruthless attorney who specialized in high-profile custody battles against wealthy fathers. Her tactics were legendary and often devastatingly effective. "There's more," Richard continued. "She's given another interview, this time to the Chronicle. It's brutal." James opened his laptop to find the article already trending. "Abandoned by a billionaire, the truth behind the Sullivan triplets." Victoria's tearful photograph accompanied quotes painting James as a callous executive who had ignored Catherine's attempts to contact him and was now using the children as a publicity stunt. "She claims Catherine called your office 17 times when she found out she was pregnant," Richard said. "Is there any truth to that?" James closed his eyes, remembering his assistant from that time, a woman he'd instructed to shield him from personal matters during the critical launch phase of his company. "It's possible," he admitted. "I was unreachable to anyone not directly involved with the business." A small sound from the doorway made him look up. Emma stood there in her pajamas, her expression unreadable. "Richard, I'll call you back," James said quickly, ending the call. "Emma, good morning. How long have you been standing there? Did you really ignore Mom's calls?" she asked directly, her young voice steady despite the weight of the question. James hesitated, then gestured for her to come sit beside him. "I didn't know she was calling," he said truthfully. "But I did make myself unavailable to people outside of work. That was wrong of me." Emma studied his face with an intensity that reminded him so much of Catherine. "Aunt Victoria says you'll get bored of us once we're not new anymore, like your fancy cars and watches." The comparison stung precisely because in the past there might have been some truth to it. James had always moved quickly from achievement to achievement, never pausing to savor success before chasing the next goal. "People aren't possessions, Emma," he said carefully. "You and your sisters aren't acquisitions. You're my daughters. That means something different than anything else in my life." "She's taking us to court," Emma stated flatly. It wasn't a question. James nodded, surprised at her awareness. "She's trying to, yes. We'll have to pick, won't we, between you and her?" Emma's voice finally betrayed a tremor of uncertainty. "It's not that simple," James began, but Emma cut him off. "It is that simple for us," she insisted. "Adults always make children choose, even when they pretend they're not." Before James could respond, his phone rang again. The board chairman demanding an update on when he'd return to full-time leadership. As he silenced it, Emma gave him a knowing look that cut straight to his core. "See? Something always matters more," she said, sliding off the couch and heading back toward the bedroom where her sisters slept, leaving James to face the uncomfortable truth in her words. Outside his window, across the street, a photographer with a telephoto lens captured the moment, further ammunition for Victoria's campaign to portray him as an unfit father. The battle lines were drawn, and James Sullivan realized he was fighting for something far more precious than any corporate takeover. His daughters' hearts and trust were at stake, and Victoria had a significant head start. The Sullivan Enterprises boardroom had always felt like home to James, a place where he commanded respect and wielded decisive power. Today, however, as he sat at the head of the polished mahogany table facing 8 stern-faced board members, it felt more like a tribunal. "James, while we sympathize with your personal situation? Harold Winters, the board chairman, began carefully. The company is suffering. The Tokyo deal is hanging by a thread. The Chicago acquisition requires your personal attention for at least 3 weeks, and it can't be postponed any longer. James glanced at the financial reports spread before him. Stock prices had dropped 7% since news of the triplets broke. Investors were nervous about his sudden shift in priorities. "I understand your concerns," James replied evenly. "But my daughters need stability right now, especially with the custody battle brewing." Eliza Chen, the newest board member, leaned forward. "James, no one is questioning your right to be a father. But Sullivan Enterprises employs over 10,000 people who depend on this company's success. Your success. You have 3 options," Harold stated bluntly. "Return to full-time leadership immediately, take a formal leave of absence while we appoint an interim CEO, or continue this half-presence that's satisfying neither your parental nor your executive responsibilities." The ultimatum hung in the air as James's phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. "Home visit from CPS in 30 minutes. Get back ASAP." "I need to go," James said, standing abruptly. "Family emergency?" Harold's expression hardened. "That's exactly what we're talking about, James. 10 years ago, you would have stayed in this room until we reached a solution, regardless of what else was happening." 10 years ago, I didn't know I had children," James replied, gathering his things. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow." At home, James arrived just as a severe-looking woman in a charcoal suit was introducing herself to Meredith at the door. "Mr. Sullivan," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Rebecca Torres from Child Protective Services. I'm here to conduct an evaluation as part of the custody proceeding initiated by Victoria Williams." The apartment, usually immaculate, now bore evidence of 3 children, backpacks by the door, artwork taped to walls, a half-completed puzzle on the coffee table. "Where are the girls?" James asked Meredith quietly. "Still at school?" Victoria insisted on picking them up today since you were in meetings. Meredith's expression conveyed her concern about this development. Ms. Torres noted this exchange on her clipboard. "Mr. Sullivan, how many hours per week would you say you spend directly supervising the children?" The question was a trap, and James knew it. Any honest answer would paint him as an absentee father, while lying would be easily disproven. "Not enough," he admitted. "I'm adjusting my schedule to prioritize them, but it's been challenging. And this Chicago trip I've heard mentioned in the filing, 3 weeks away from children who've just lost their mother and grandmother, seems problematic, doesn't it?" Before James could respond, the elevator doors opened to reveal Victoria with the triplets, all wearing matching outfits he'd never seen before. "Oh," Victoria feigned surprise. "We didn't realize you'd be home, James. The girls and I had such a lovely afternoon shopping." Her eyes flicked meaningfully to Ms. Torres. "I wanted them to have proper clothes that actually fit, not just whatever. Could be ordered online." The implied criticism was clear, as was the message to the CPS worker. Victoria had time for the children. James did not. As the triplets spotted Ms. Torres's clipboard, their expressions changed. They'd seen enough officials with paperwork to know what it meant. Another disruption was coming. In that moment, facing his daughter's apprehension, the board's ultimatum, and Victoria's smug certainty that he would choose his company, James Sullivan realized he had reached his own moment of truth. The Chicago trip loomed like a storm cloud on James's horizon. His flight was booked for tomorrow morning, a corporate jet waiting to whisk him away to salvage the acquisition that could cement Sullivan Enterprises' market dominance for years to come. His suitcase sat half-packed in his bedroom, a symbol of his divided loyalties. "Mr. Sullivan." Meredith appeared in his doorway, her expression troubled. "The school just called. There's been an incident with Sophia." 20 minutes later, James rushed through the elementary school corridors, his heart pounding. In the counselor's office, he found Sophia huddled in a chair, tears streaming silently down her face. A partially destroyed paper project lay on the table before her. "What happened?" James asked the counselor, a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as Ms. Patel. Today's assignment was creating family trees, Ms. Patel explained gently. Sophia became upset when some classmates questioned why her tree didn't match others. James knelt beside his daughter, noting the family tree with branches labeled Mommy and Daddy, but with only Catherine's photo attached. His own branch remained conspicuously empty. "I didn't know what picture to put," Sophia whispered. "I don't have any of you." The simple statement hit James with unexpected force. Of course they had no photos together. He'd been absent for their entire lives. "Then Tommy said you weren't really our dad," Sophia continued, her voice trembling. "He said his mom read that you're only pretending because you need heirs for your money." James felt a surge of protective anger, but before he could respond, the office door opened again. Victoria swept in, wearing an expression of practiced concern. "I came as soon as I heard," she announced, casting James a triumphant glance before focusing on Sophia. "Sweetheart, I'm here now." "The school called you too?" James asked, keeping his voice neutral despite his irritation. "I'm listed as their emergency contact," Victoria replied smoothly. "Have been since they were born." The implication was clear. She had been there from the beginning. He had not. "Your flight to Chicago is early tomorrow, isn't it, James?" Victoria continued, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Don't worry about cutting your time with Sophia short. I can take her home with me." Ms. Patel glanced uncomfortably between the adults, clearly sensing the tension. "My flight's been cancelled," James said abruptly, surprising even himself with the decision. "I'm not going to Chicago." Victoria's smile faltered. "But your big acquisition can wait," James finished firmly. He turned back to Sophia, whose tears had slowed as she watched this exchange. "How about we take some photos together today, all four of us? Then you can finish your family tree properly." For the first time that day, Sophia's face brightened slightly. As they left the school together, James's phone rang incessantly, the board chairman no doubt having heard of his cancelled trip. But watching Sophia walk beside him, her small hand cautiously slipping into his, James knew he'd made the only possible choice. That evening, after an impromptu photo session that had even Emma laughing, James sat the girls down for the conversation he should have had days ago. "I need to tell you something important," he began carefully. "I've turned down a business trip that would have taken me away for 3 weeks." "Because of us?" Olivia asked with her characteristic directness. "Yes," James admitted. "Because some things are more important than business deals. I'm learning." "That a bit late, but I am learning." "Aunt Victoria says you'll never change," Emma stated, though her tone held a question rather than certainty. "People can change, Emma," James replied gently, "when they find something worth changing for." 3 pairs of blue eyes, his eyes, studied him intently, weighing his words against the abandonment they'd already experienced. The trust he saw tentatively blooming there was worth more than any corporate acquisition. The family courtroom was smaller than James had expected, more intimate and therefore more intimidating. He adjusted his tie nervously as his attorney, Richard, reviewed their strategy one final time. "Remember, stick to the facts," Richard advised. "Victoria's team will try to provoke an emotional response." Across the aisle, Victoria sat with her, attorney Elaine Hoffman, whose reputation for ruthlessness was well earned. Victoria wore a conservative navy dress that emphasized her connection to the traditional family values she claimed to represent. When the triplets entered with their court-appointed guardian ad litem, James felt his heart constrict. They looked so small and solemn in their matching dresses, their identical faces tight with anxiety. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Martinez entered the courtroom. The proceedings began with Victoria's testimony, carefully crafted to highlight her lifelong presence in the girls' lives. She described holidays, birthdays, and everyday moments James had missed, each example another knife twisting in his conscience. "And how often did Catherine discuss Mr. Sullivan with you?" Elaine Hoffman asked. "She was devastated by his rejection," Victoria replied, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "When she found out she was pregnant with triplets, she called his office repeatedly, but he never returned her calls. She told me he had made his choice, his company over her." James gripped the edge of the table, forcing himself to remain composed as Victoria continued painting him as an ambitious executive who had abandoned Catherine and was now claiming the children only to protect his public image. When it was James's turn to testify, Elaine's cross-examination was merciless. "Mr. Sullivan, in the past month, how many hours have you personally spent with the children without assistance from nannies or your executive assistant?" "I've been adjusting my schedule." "A number, please," Elaine interrupted. "Not enough," James admitted, "but I'm making changes like canceling business trips at the last minute. How can the court trust your commitment when your pattern throughout life has been prioritizing work above personal relationships?" Richard objected, but the damage was done. James felt sweat beading on his forehead as Elaine continued her methodical dismantling of his case. "Your company requires frequent international travel, correct? And long hours. How can you possibly provide the stability these children need after the trauma they've experienced?" When Elaine finished, Judge Martinez called a brief recess. In the hallway, James spotted the triplets sitting on a bench with their guardian ad litem. He approached cautiously, aware of the rules limiting contact during proceedings. "Are you going to lose?" Emma asked bluntly when the guardian allowed him to speak with them briefly. "I don't know," James answered honestly. "But whatever happens, I want you three to know something important." He knelt to their level, ignoring the expensive suit pants pressing against the courthouse floor. "Finding out about you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because you're my biological children, but because knowing you has helped me understand what really matters." When court reconvened, James dismissed the carefully prepared statement his legal team had crafted. Instead, he spoke directly to Judge Martinez about his journey over the past month, his mistakes, his regrets, and his commitment to change. "I can't change the past 7 years," he concluded, "but I can promise that from the moment I learned about my daughters, they became my priority. I've stepped back from daily operations at my company. I've canceled the Chicago acquisition that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of my career. Victoria claims I'll always choose work over family, but I've already proven that assumption wrong." As he finished speaking, the courtroom doors opened and a frail figure in a wheelchair entered, pushed by a nurse. Margaret Williams, looking alarmingly thin but determined, had somehow left her hospital bed to be here. "Your Honor," she called weakly, "I have testimony relevant to this case." The judge's eyes widened in surprise, but he nodded, allowing this unexpected development. No one was more shocked than Victoria, whose composure finally cracked as her mother prepared to speak. The courtroom fell silent as Margaret's wheelchair was positioned before the judge. Despite her frail appearance, her voice carried surprising strength as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, I've come to speak the truth about my daughters and my granddaughters." Margaret's thin hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the oxygen tube in her nostrils. "Victoria has painted a picture that doesn't reflect reality." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat as her mother continued. "While Victoria claims to have been present throughout the girls' lives, the truth is she visited perhaps twice a year, usually on holidays, and always with expensive gifts, but little, Actual involvement. Margaret paused to catch her breath. Catherine kept a journal documenting the girls' lives. In it, she expressed her intention to contact James when the girls turned 7. Margaret turned to look directly at Victoria. She never intended for Victoria to have custody, Your Honor. She knew her sister's resentment toward James was unhealthy, a resentment born from Victoria's own feelings for James during college, feelings he never returned. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Victoria's face flushed deep red as this revelation hung in the air. "That's a lie," Victoria protested, her composure cracking. "This is about what's best for the girls, not ancient history." "Is it?" Margaret questioned gently. "Or is it about punishing James for choosing Catherine instead of you all those years ago?" As the judge called for order, James sat stunned by this revelation. Suddenly, Victoria's vendetta made more sense. It wasn't just about Catherine, but about her own rejected feelings. When court adjourned for the day, James found himself facing the most momentous decision of his life. His legal team had arranged an emergency meeting with the board of Sullivan Enterprises, who were demanding resolution to the leadership crisis. "The board has made their position clear," Richard explained as they left the courthouse. "Either you return to full-time leadership and arrange suitable childcare for the girls, or they'll enforce the succession clause in your contract." The succession clause, something James had insisted on years ago to ensure company stability, would force him to step down if he became incapacitated or otherwise unable to fulfill the duties of CEO. Never had he imagined it would be used against him for choosing fatherhood. Back at his apartment, the triplets were unusually quiet, sensing the weight of the day's events. As James tucked them into bed that night, Sophia held onto his hand. "Are you going to choose us or your company?" she asked, her voice small but direct. The question pierced him. All 3 girls watched him expectantly, their identical blue eyes, his eyes, searching for truth. "Some choices look difficult but are actually simple once you know what matters most," James replied carefully. "Tomorrow, I'm going to make some changes that might surprise people." The next morning, James walked into Sullivan Tower wearing not his usual power suit, but casual slacks and a sweater. He rode the elevator directly to the boardroom where the emergency meeting was already in progress. "James," Harold Winters began formally, "we've prepared the necessary paperwork for both scenarios. Either you sign this agreement committing to full-time leadership, effective immediately, or this one, transferring CEO powers temporarily to the COO." James looked around the table at the faces of people who had been his colleagues for years. Then he placed a third document on the table. "I've prepared my own option," he said calmly. "Effective immediately. I'm stepping down as CEO and will serve only as chairman of the board, with limited hours and responsibilities." The room erupted in shock, but James continued with newfound clarity. "My daughters need me more than this company does, and I need them more than I need this title." Across town, Victoria received the news with disbelief. Her leverage, his obsession with his company, had just evaporated, forcing her to reconsider her strategy in a custody battle that suddenly looked much less certain. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the final day of the custody hearing began. News of James Sullivan's shocking resignation as CEO had spread like wildfire through the business world and now cast a long shadow over the proceedings. Victoria sat at her table looking distinctly unsettled, while James appeared more relaxed than he had in years, his focus entirely on the 3 small figures sitting with their guardian ad litem. Judge Martinez cleared his throat. "Before we continue, I'd like to hear from Margaret Williams again. Her testimony yesterday raised significant concerns about the motivations behind this custody dispute." Margaret, looking even frailer than the day before, was wheeled to the front of the courtroom. Her nurse hovered nearby with an oxygen tank. "Your Honor," Margaret began, her voice thin but determined. "I brought Catherine's journal with me today." In her final entry, 3 weeks before the accident, she wrote specifically about her wishes for the girls if anything happened to her. Victoria shifted uncomfortably as Margaret handed the leather-bound book to the judge. Catherine knew she was the bridge between the girls and both sides of their family. Margaret continued. She wanted them to know their father, but she feared Victoria's resentment would poison that relationship. "Mother, please," Victoria interrupted, but Judge Martinez silenced her with a stern look. Catherine wrote that Victoria had always been jealous of her relationship with James in college. Margaret explained, her eyes sad but resolute. When Victoria learned about the pregnancy, she encouraged Catherine to hide it from James, saying he would only disappoint her again. But Catherine confided in me that as the girls grew older, she questioned that decision more each day. The judge read silently from the journal, his expression grave. "Mrs. Williams, did Victoria know about your daughter's intentions to contact Mr. Sullivan?" "Yes," Margaret answered. Catherine told her just weeks before the accident. Victoria was furious, said James would take the girls away from all of us. They had a terrible argument about it. A heavy silence fell over the courtroom as all eyes turned to Victoria, who stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous." Catherine was naive about him, she protested. She didn't understand what kind of man he really is. "And what kind of man is that?" "Ms. Williams?" Judge Martinez asked evenly. Victoria gestured wildly toward James. "A man who abandons his responsibilities, who chooses his career over family, who just gave up his position as CEO to focus on his daughters?" The judge finished for her, raising an eyebrow. With that simple observation, Victoria's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. But the most devastating blow came next, from an unexpected source. Emma stood up from her seat, her small voice ringing clear in the hushed courtroom. "Aunt Victoria told us our father knew about us and didn't want us," she announced. "She said it yesterday when she took us for ice cream. She said he only wants us now because it looks good for his company." Olivia nodded in confirmation. "She said we shouldn't call him Dad because he'll send us away when he gets tired of playing family." The judge's expression darkened as he turned to Victoria. "Ms. Williams, have you been deliberately attempting to alienate these children from their father?" Before Victoria could formulate a response, Sophia slipped from her seat and walked to James's side, taking his hand in a gesture that spoke volumes. "He's our dad," she said simply, "and he doesn't pretend to be perfect. He just tries really hard." In that moment, watching his daughter's brave stand, James felt something shift permanently within him. The court battle, his company, his former priorities, all paled in comparison to earning that simple declaration of trust from his children. As Judge Martinez called a brief recess to consider his ruling, James knelt beside Sophia, with Emma and Olivia quickly joining them in a tight circle that excluded everything else in the world. "Whatever happens," he promised them, "we're family now, and nothing is more important than that." 3 months after the custody hearing had concluded, James stood at the window of his penthouse, watching the city lights shimmer below. The apartment had transformed completely. Where once sleek minimalism had reigned, now color and life flourished everywhere. Emma's soccer trophies lined one shelf, Olivia's collection of science books filled a bookcase, and Sophia's artwork adorned every wall. Judge Martinez had granted James full custody, with provisions for regular visits with Margaret, whose health had stabilized enough for her to move into an assisted living facility near their building. Victoria had been granted limited supervised visitation rights, contingent upon her completion of family therapy sessions, a requirement she was reluctantly fulfilling. "Dad." The word still sent a thrill through him each time he heard it. Sophia appeared at his side, sketchbook in hand. "I made something for your office," James examined the detailed drawing of the four of them, remarkably skilled for a 6-year-old. In the background was the Sullivan Tower, but the focus was clearly on the family, not the building that had once been the center of his world. "It's perfect," he said, pulling her into a gentle hug. "I'll put it right next to my desk." The transition hadn't been easy. Learning to braid hair, navigate school projects, and manage the emotional needs of 3 distinct personalities had pushed James far beyond his comfort zone. But each awkward attempt, each small success, had built a foundation of trust stronger than any corporate empire. "The car is waiting," called Meredith, who had surprisingly thrived in her expanded role that now balanced both business and family logistics. "The board meeting starts in 30 minutes. As chairman of the board, rather than CEO, James attended monthly meetings instead of daily operations, leaving him abundant time with the girls. Today, however, was special. The triplets would be joining him at Sullivan Tower for the first time. Emma emerged from her room, wearing a miniature blazer that matched his own, a deliberate choice that touched him deeply. Olivia followed with a tablet clutched to her chest, eager to see the company's operations room with its wall of data screens. "Do you think people will stare at us?" Emma asked as they rode the elevator down to the garage. "Probably," James answered honestly, "but only because they've heard how amazing you 3 are." The private family entrance to Sullivan Tower bypassed the main lobby, where reporters occasionally still lingered, hoping for photographs of the Sullivan triplets who had changed the trajectory of a business titan. In his office before the meeting, James paused before a photograph prominently displayed on his desk. Catherine, smiling brightly at a college graduation, full of life and promise. Beside it now sat Sophia's family. "Portrait. Your mother would be so proud of you 3, he told the girls as they gathered around him. "And I think—" He hesitated, emotion tightening his throat. "I think she would be proud of me too, finally." As they walked toward the boardroom, Emma slipped her hand into his. Olivia quick-stepped beside them, peppering him with questions about stock prices. Sophia trailed slightly behind, already sketching the impressive view from the executive floor. James Sullivan had once defined success by acquisitions, market share, and profit margins. Now, success was measured in bedtime stories, homework help, and 3 voices calling him Dad. The company still thrived under its new CEO, but James had found something far more valuable than financial wealth. He had found his legacy in the 3 remarkable girls who had unexpectedly given his life its true purpose. The empire he had spent decades building would endure, but it was the family he was building now that would truly last forever.